Alright, hello, Bill Bryson here. Just kind of go through the hardware components here of the live sectional. Want to kind of walk you through the steps of how to wire this all up and kind of the things you're going to be looking at using. So the components I have here in front of me, I have the Raspberry Pi, which is the computer that we're going to use to interface with the LEDs and pull the weather from the FAA to assign those lights the appropriate colors. The Raspberry Pi I've got here is a Raspberry Pi 2, a B model, and the important thing is that we've got these GPIO pins here that we can interface with to talk to the lights. You can use a Raspberry Pi 2 or a Raspberry Pi 3. The nice thing about the Raspberry Pi 3 is it's got a built-in Wi-Fi adapter. The Raspberry Pi 2s don't, so you've got to use something like this, an Edimax Wi-Fi dongle, which is just a USB Wi-Fi adapter that you'll need to add onto the list. In the shopping list I have on the site, though, is using a Raspberry Pi 3, so you don't need to worry about that if you're getting things off the list. We are also going to be using a breadboard. And this breadboard here is what's going to allow us to hook the wiring from the power supply and the wiring from the LEDs and the wiring from the Pi all together to link those things up. If you are comfortable with soldering, this can be taken out of the equation and you can solder everything together, and that will work just fine as well. We've got our power supply here. The nice thing about this is the end of the power supply can be taken off, and you can do all your wiring ahead of time, and then when you're ready to try things out, plug it in and give it power. I've got some male to female jumper cables here. I've got a female to female and another male to female here. On the end of my LED string here, I've got already wired up a couple of male to stripped off end jumper wires, because I just twisted these wires together here. You should use some heat shrinks material here, or to try to cover this up, or some electrical tape when you get ready to do your finished product. But just for testing, it's okay to just twist those together. Basically what it is, I took a male to female jumper wire here and just pulled off this end, and then that exposed some wire that I could twist onto the end of the string. This string I cut off. This is kind of the leftover parts I have, so normally your string would have connectors at both ends. Mine does not, because I cut it off and the other half of the string is in my board. So I'm dealing with open wires here. You can use male to male jumper wires if you're going to be interacting with your lights that you get brand new. So just use the correct jumper wires to make those connections happen. So the thing to know on these LEDs is that there's a beginning end and an end to the LED string. You can apply power to both ends of the string. There's power wires on this end and there's power wires on this end. There's also data wires on both ends, but it's important that you plug your Pi into the correct end of the string, because the data only flows one direction. And you can tell which side that is on by looking at the LED itself. It's got on the chip, if you look inside the housing, on the chip, there's it's written on the side of the microchip what each wire does. So in this case, we've got a red wire, that's our power wire, a blue wire, which is our ground, and the white middle wire is our data line. The side that's got the writing on it, or the little markings to denote what the wires do, is the correct line to use as your data in. So you want to go to your first bulb on the end of the string and look and see those wires that go into the microchip and are soldered into the side of the chip that has the writing on it. That's the side in, that's your data in. The wires then flow back out on the bottom side and continue the string along. And you'll look at the next one and it comes in to the top side of the LED and it's got the writing on it. So that's your data in. For the string that's on the list, it's the end that has the female connector end on it. So this side is the male connector. It's the female end is that you want to use for connecting this up. That's the appropriate end to use for your data in. Remember, you can use either end for applying power to the string. I've heard that if you're using more than 2 strings, you should apply power every 2 strings to your light. So if you have a massive live sectional with like 200 lights on it, every 2 strings of lights, you want to inject power along the way. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But let's go ahead and get this thing wired up here. The other thing that we need to look at is we have these diodes here that are going to reduce power for the LEDs. I've already got one embedded into the breadboard here, and the important thing to notice about those is it's got a white stripe on one end of the diode and a non-stripy end. So it's important that you plug the lights in alongside the white stripe edge, and you plug your power into the non-stripe end. We'll get into that in a little bit. So to wire this thing up, first let's start with power. Okay, so we're going to take our power cord here, and what I've done is just taken a male to male and put those in and screwed those down tight. Another thing you can do is pop the ends off, so you've got bare wire, and plug those all the way in there, so you've got even some of the sheath kind of stuck in there, and screw those down tight so you've got a good solid connection there. Let's look at the breadboard quick. On our breadboard, we've got long outer rows on the outside edges. There's 2 on each side. One is red, denoting that you should use that for your power, and the other is blue, denoting you should use that for your ground. They also have a plus and a minus next to those to help that make that connection. So those outer edge rows run all along the vertical edge of the breadboard. The inner 2 wide rows, those go laterally, and so those connect up 5 holes together on this half of the board, and then these 5 are all These 5 here are connected in rows on this side of the board. So we're going to basically be using half of the breadboard here to kind of get things set up and running. So I've already got the diode put in place here. I took some wire snips and snipped the wire a little shorter so it fits down snug onto the board there. But so let's start with our ground on our power supply, and we're going to plug that into the ground, the outside edge line for our ground, and then the power I'm going to put into the middle area in line with the non-white stripe end of the diode. So that gets our power set up. Next, let's get our LEDs wired in. Okay, so I'm going to take our red power wire, which I've got connected to it a purple jumper wire, and I'm going to make sure that's on there good. So the red wire is going to go in alongside the white stripe end of the LED, and this yellow one I've got hooked up to my blue wire, which is the ground, is going to go into my ground outside edge line. So that gives power to the LEDs. Next, we're going to bring our Pi in. So we need to apply power to the Pi. So I'm going to use this green wire, jumper wire, a male to female, to be my power wire for the Pi. So the power is going to be in the pin number 4. So it's going to be the outside edge pin number 2. So I'm going to plug that in onto the Pi, and that's going to go into the same line as my power in on the non-white stripe side of the diode. I'm going to take this black wire and make it my ground. So it's going to go on the 6th wire, and that's going to be my ground. And it's going to go to the outside edge row to be with our ground line there. And then finally we need to do our data line. And so data is going to be pin 12, which is going to be the outside edge row pin number 6. So, or pin number 6 on the outside edge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's pin number 12, which actually is GPIO port 18. And then we're going to plug that into the middle wire, the white wire, that we've got on our LED string. So we'll plug that in there. Okay, everything is wired up. I've already configured the Pi to talk to my home Wi-Fi. Make sure you take a look at the configuring the configuration files video I have on how to do that. And so let's see what happens when we plug it in here. The Pi is lighting up. here on the end. It's booting up. We don't have a display hooked up at this point, so we're just kind of waiting and seeing what happens with our lights. There, they all turn on. It's going to pull the weather from the FAA, run through that script, figure out what lights need to be VFR, IFR, marginal VFR, low IFR, or not reporting, and then it's going to assign all the colors to the lights, which should happen here momentarily. And there we go. So this is a truncated version of the lights, but it's now assigned all the lights, and look at it's good flying here in northern Minnesota today. So green lights across the board. Hope this has been helpful for you, and feel free to reach out to me via the email link in the directions. Be happy to give you a hand. Oftentimes I just give you my cell number and we can chat about what's going on, and we can walk you through the steps and get this up and running for you. It's really a fun project.